Hi folks, the purpose of this brief mini lecture is to orient you to some more specific methods that you can use in the academic research paper. And essentially what we're going to do is talk about some methods of investigating and explaining and review the general structure of what a research paper should be and the types of things that I'm going to be looking for in that paper. Now, like I've told you in the past, the first two things you want to think about when you sit down to write any paper are purpose and audience. Purpose meaning, what do I want to accomplish with this piece of writing? And audience, is really, really important. And you need to think about who am I specifically writing for. In regard to this research paper, the purpose this time is to inform and not argue, but to inform your audience about some aspect of a social justice issue. Now, this social justice issue can be a local issue, it could be a national issue, or it could even be globally or international, like the two that you see in the photo here. One big problem globally is the problem of clean drinking water for poor individuals in countries all across the world. And quite often, the reason these individuals don't have clean drinking water is because of the polluting that large American corporations do inside of these countries. We also have the issue of women's rights, which you'll see on the right there, in many foreign countries. For instance, in Afghanistan, women have struggled many, many years and continue to do so because they aren't treated equally to men in that culture. There are many others that you could focus on if you choose to do so as well. Many other cultures, that is. And inside our own country, we also have many, many problems with inequality and injustice, one of which is the working poor. There are many that you could focus on. But the working poor are a big problem in the sense that, here you have people who work 40 hours a week or more and still find themselves beneath the poverty level. Now, in this paper, if you would choose to write this topic, for instance, or focus on this topic, what you'd want to do is talk about, well, what causes this problem in the first place? Why is it that people work 40 hours a week or more and still find themselves below the poverty line and can barely get by? Because usually when people think of, the poor, they think of someone like the guy on the right here who might find themselves homeless. So, the working poor is just one of many, many, many examples of inequality and injustice in our particular national culture. We also have racial, ethnic, and gender inequalities within our country. In America, for instance, when President Obama came into office in 2008, he passed the Lilly Ledbetter Act, which guaranteed equal pay for equal work for women. However, statistically, this still has not happened yet. I think the last statistic I heard stated that women made 76 cents for every dollar that a man earned performing the same job. We also have inequalities in education. Many inner city schools lack the appropriate tools that they need for students to perform well. And then you have another problem of students, kids who are on free lunches and things like this, who need these free lunches, and politicians cut them from their budgets. And then you have kids who are in schools without the appropriate tools that they need, and they're hungry, so now they can't focus as well. So what causes this, and what are the possible effects of this later, and is this fair? Then there are many eco-justice issues within our country as well, one of which is drinking water. And you might think, well, that's something that happens in other countries and not in America, but it does. There are many large corporations in America that still pollute and affect our drinking water here. A lot of times these large corporations that are polluting are actually in some of the poorer neighborhoods and next to the poorer neighborhoods, and of course these are already individuals that struggle, so this is only causing more problems in regard to that. And then you also have large corporations that feel that it's okay for them to pollute, and that they're not really responsible in any way for what they do to the environment or to our drinking water. So these are also issues of social justice. As I mentioned before, there are many types of global issues, one of which is human rights. You're going to read an article about how Apple may, and I emphasize the may be um, taking advantage of Chinese workers. In other words, they're creating lots of iPads and iPhones for us, but at what cost? Um, then there's also, the issue of sex trafficking of women, and this is something you may not be familiar with, but it's something that happens a lot. You'd be shocked at the statistic. So I'm going to discuss in the video an article by a woman that you could look at if you're interested in this. But this is certainly a huge problem in our culture and cultures across the world. So any of these topics would be okay. As I mentioned in the last video, probably the most important step in the research process is choosing a topic. So be sure that you do look around a lot and try to find something that truly interests you and that you want to know more about, and choose that topic for your paper. So after you've decided on a purpose and a topic, the next step would be to think about your audience. Now, the audience this time around is going to be very different than the audience for your last paper. In the memoir and narrative, you were to imagine that your audience was your best friend. So in that sense, the language would have been, or should have been, very informal. You might have even used slang. You would certainly use the first person. Now, in this academic research paper, your audience is made up of academics, scholars, researchers, professors, and experts. And you're trying to inform these particular academic scholars, researchers, professors, and experts on this topic that you've chosen related to social justice. So because you've chosen this audience, this is going to definitely affect many things, one of which is language. Unlike the last paper where you could use informal language and maybe even slang, this time around you cannot use that at all. No slang. The language is very, very formal. This means there's no first person, and there's also no personal pronouns such as you, us, we, me, my, mine, our, ours, as in O-U-R and O-U-R-S. No contractions either. So can't becomes cannot, don't becomes do not, doesn't becomes does not, etc., etc., etc. So, be sure you're paying close attention to those things. So again, your audience is determining your diction, so it's determining your formality of language. So be sure that you're doing these things and keeping your language formal in your research paper, because you're speaking to individuals that you don't really know very well, so it's a formal situation. And these are also very highly educated individuals, and so the language should be elevated this time around. So because you're speaking to highly educated individuals, you want to speak with the highly educated voice that you possess yourself. You also want to be certain that you're remaining neutral and unbiased. Now, when we get to the MLA lecture, we'll talk more specifically about how to do this and how to avoid moving from informing to arguing, because students tend to want to argue a lot. We're going to talk about something called qualifiers, but we're going to save that for the later lecture. Just keep in mind that it's important that you remain neutral and unbiased. Okay, so as far as the essay itself goes, the title and the opening paragraph are probably the two most important parts of your research paper. The title should reflect the entire content of your paper. A lot of times titles for research papers are very, very, very long, and I'll give you a brief example of one. So here's the title of a student's paper from last year. We were focusing on art that term, and the title of his paper was Homoerotic Photography and Image in 21st Century Pop Culture, from Cult Status to Mainstream International Media Success. So as you can see, this title is particularly long. A lot of times academic research papers use a colon of some type, and they sort of have several ideas going in that title in some way. The important thing to keep in mind, though, is the title of the paper should reflect the entire. The title of the paper should reflect the entire content of that particular paper. The intro should preview the entire content of the paper as well. So you want to keep that in mind, that what the title and the intro both do is they set up the expectation for your reader of what you plan to discuss in your paper. And then if the body of that paper doesn't match up with those two things, well, then you have a disconnect with your reader. So be sure that your title and your intro reflect the entire content of your paper. Sometimes it's actually helpful to write the body of your paper first, as long as you understand what your thesis is, and then, at the end, go back and write your introduction and your conclusion, and then give it a title. So just keep in mind, though, that as far as the intro goes, the intro has several parts. There's a lead-in sentence which sort of leads your reader into the idea. You're sort of guiding them into it. And then, of course, you have a thesis statement, which is the main point that you plan to discuss in your paper. And then you also need to preview the main ideas that you're going to discuss in the body. Now, this so what that I have listed here, that's the sort of, I guess, the basic reason why you think it's important that your reader understand this information. While you need to keep in mind you're not arguing, you just want to make it clear that, hey, this is one of the many reasons why someone should care about this topic. For instance, the drinking water issue in foreign countries. A reader of your paper might think, well, so what? That doesn't affect me. I live in the United States. And so for your so what question, or your answer to that question, what you'd want to do in your intro is give them the so what. Give them a reason why, as someone in America, that they should care. So after you have that intro there at the beginning, in the body, essentially what you're doing is you're informing the reader of the details related to all those ideas you've introduced. So in the body, you're informing the reader the who, the what, the why, the when, the where, and the how related to your topic. And you're taking a journalistic approach by giving this who, what, why, when, where, and how. Again, you're not arguing, you're only giving the reasons for this issue, like what caused it and what its possible effects might be later, or what some of the possible effects have been observed so far. So you must remain unbiased, fair, and balanced, and you're not trying to argue any particular stance personally. Personally, you're being unbiased and you're not including your personal opinion. What you'll do is you're going to go out and gather research on this topic, and then you're going to present this research based on what other people have said. That doesn't mean you're not saying anything, and I know that sounds complicated, and we'll talk more about it in one of the later lectures and in class. That goes back to the qualifying statements that I talked about earlier. But essentially, you want to approach this much like a journalist would. For instance, on the 6 o'clock news, you would never hear a journalist say, for instance, John Smith murdered his wife in cold blood today by bludgeoning her several times in the abdomen with a serrated butcher knife in his kitchen. He's a horrible man. You would never hear anything like that. Because journalists don't get involved personally in their stories. They sort of stand outside of them and report to you what they see. You would, however, hear the journalist say something like this. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department reported today that John Smith allegedly bludgeoned his wife several times in the abdomen with a serrated butcher knife in their kitchen. In that last statement, the journalist is not including their personal opinion at all. As a matter of fact, you don't know what they personally feel in regard to this particular issue in any way. And that's what you're supposed to do in your research paper this time, is just keep your own personal views directly out of the paper and just show us what the information is on your topic, the who, what, why, when, where, and how. So there's a big difference between being a journalist and a commentator. A journalist would do what I showed you in the second example there, where they're just reporting what other people have said, they're just giving you the facts and the facts only. And they're not doing so by telling you what they think. A commentator will tell you what they think. Now, this is something you see a lot on news networks like CNN, Fox